and we're going to talk about AI in
Yeah,
photography.
this is going to be an interesting one because I think there's a lot of division out there about AI right now. You know, there are a lot of camera companies out there that are implementing AI into their cameras. We talk about Sony, we talk about Olympus and Panasonic really leading the way on this. And of course, AI is very prevalent in phone photography as well. We can't forget like the iPhones and the Google Pixels and all of those kind of things that people use. But aside from the technology standpoint, it's also coming more into play into the software side. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about this is because there's been a recent update to Photoshop that has really added a lot more AI features into Photoshop that's more akin to like the Luminars out there on the market in regards to like sky replacements and editing and adding and subtraction more objects from people's images. And I'm really on the fence about AI, and I can't decide whether I really like it, or if it's going to help photography and help photographers, or if in the long run it is going to um, kind of destroy photography. And I'm just kind of wondering what everyone in the room thinks and what you think about it, Chris, because this is becoming a bigger part of photography the more we go on.
I completely agree with you. I think in the next decade we're going to see a major shift in it.
Hmm.
Um, I think so. I think there's good things about AI. I think there's bad things about AI. Colloquially, with focusing, you had to sit there and you had to crank a lens to try to get like a bird in focus, or like uh, I don't know, a racehorse in focus or something like
Hmm.
that. And then you had autofocus, and it could focus on something, and then you had autofocus tracking. And now you have tracking that can understand that something is an animal and that that's what you want to focus on. And personally speaking, I think that when AI is in the camera, I think it's good, and I still think that it's photography. I think that AI, when it is used outside of the camera in post production on a computer or on a phone or something like that, then I think that's when it becomes a photo composite.
Yeah, I would agree with that assessment totally.
Yes, and I think that it's similar to an in camera double exposure.
Hmm.
Um, a double exposure in camera was actually done literally in camera. You have to have the skill, you have to know the understanding between light and dark, and you have to pre plan, right? But with Photoshop, you can sit there and you can just mess around with it, and then it becomes a photo composite. And
Hmm.
it's still double exposure. You could make a solid argument to say that it is a photograph, but you could also make a better argument to say that it is post production and it is composite, and you wouldn't have actually gotten it unless you knew how to do that in post production. And I can really say this because a lot of my work, my personal work, is multiple exposures.
Hmm.
Um, you can check them out on my website, thegampat.com. I have a literal whole section for this stuff. Um, and I think AI in camera in that case makes sense because it could probably help us with creating a better image in camera. And I think it
Hmm.
sort of is doing that with Olympus's live composite.
Yeah.
Like it looks at a scene and it's like, okay, this is what it wants. This is what the photographer wants. Oh, it doesn't want that. Okay, cool. Let's get rid of that. But I mean, also with autofocus, I think it's fine. Um, Yeah, man. I also just think that in the next 10 years that it will be a standard part of photography, but I also am now trying to think about like what else in technologically came with photography uh that made it sort of a standard. That became a standard rather, and I can't necessarily think of anything
Hmm.
except for maybe Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity, but that
Right.
doesn't change photography, you know? Mirrorless doesn't change photography for what it is.
Do you
Uh,
think that more AI in cameras is going to have a detrimental effect on people being able to do, say, focus stacking by themselves, or knowing how to change an autofocus point by themselves? And I bring this up because I went on the photo walk not too long ago with a bunch of people, and I took one of my old Pentax cameras with me. It's an old DSLR, it's the old KS2. And I handed it over to a young photographer. I said, here, go ahead and take a picture of this nice model for us. And he couldn't figure out how to change an autofocusing point to put the focusing point over the model's eye. And he was shooting with a Sony. That's all he ever knew. And he was only able to rely on the camera to get the image he needed. So that was a whole learning experience for him.
I do think it's detrimental. I do not think that we should use technology as a crutch. It's one of the big reasons why I instill in the staff that we all know like Sunny 16, or we know certain things like how to actually handhold a camera to shoot for more than a second long or something like that. I think it's very important to do that. When you are just relying on the technology, there's this whole idea in journalism, and I went to school for journalism, that as we use technology, we become the technology. We use this every day.
Yep.
We have become this. We rely on it for Facebook. We rely on it for Instagram. We rely on it for email. We rely on it to message people. Remember picking up a landline and calling someone?
Yeah, in fact, I remember going back even further than that and using the old rotary phones as well, where you had to dial
Yeah, I
numbers.
had one of those in my house too, growing up.
Yeah.
I remember those, and no one has landline anymore. Um, the broader point is, as we use technology, we become them, and we rely on them a lot more. Um, and that young gentleman probably realized, like, oh wow, I'm not as great as a photographer as I thought I was, like, because now I have to do all these things manually. And quite honestly, I think that everyone's first camera should be something that requires you to be very, very manual. I honestly think that, like, they should find a way to bring back the Pentax K1000 and make it super cheap and say this is a beginner's camera for a serious photographer.
I think that would sell like hotcakes,
Yeah.
personally. Yeah.
And I mean, Pentax years ago made the K, I think it was the K01 with, like, it was mirrorless, but it had the K mount still. There's
Yep.
proof that, like, I mean, if you look at old K mount cameras, like, you can turn those into mirrorless cameras pretty easily, and you can put those K mount lenses on there pretty easily. You don't necessarily need the mirror and pentaprism anymore.
Right.
You're a K12 owner.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, you've seen that yourself too.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely room for them to play around with mirrorless again for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, to your point, I do think AI will be detrimental in that way, but I don't know if it's our responsibility as teachers and as journalists to remind people that, like, hey, you can do all these things. You don't have to sit there like on crutches, so to speak, and rely on the camera to do everything for you. I'm sitting here thinking about that, and there are generations of this being done already. I mean, the Kodak Instamatic, that did everything for you. All these point and shoot cameras for years, that did everything for you. The ghost of Steve Jobs in every one of these, he does everything for you because he thinks you're too stupid.
Absolutely.
Like, every time you take a photo, he's just like, oh man, that's bad. You'll do better next time. Or I'll just do this for you because anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a fine line that we're going to have to tread, because otherwise it's really going to take away any kind of skill set that a person's going to have to be able to pick up a camera and take a great image. And it's really going to make those who earn their livings as photographers' lives much harder, because the playing field's going to be spread out so far.
I agree with you, but I also think that those at the higher end can find a way to use it as well too, to augment what they're doing and probably become even better. I mean, we've seen that with a couple things, like all these new art buyers and social media managers are just like, oh, I'm just going to rely on what Instagram is telling me. Like, oh, this photo got the most likes. Cool, we'll go with that. Whereas it's totally different because the people that are at the top are still able to use the technology to do even better because they have things like people skills and they have
Definitely.
marketing skills and they have conversational skills to be able to sell themselves and they have lighting skills and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. So I think that yes, the the lower tier is moving up, but I also think that we should use that to sit there and say to ourselves, okay, but this also means that the higher tier can move up so we can do something to really push ourselves more. And I think that that is why it's very important for us to have creative projects as
Hmm.
passionate photographers. I'm saying that specifically because, I mean, you can be a professional photographer that is not passionate about your job. Um,
Definitely.
and I think that those of us that are actually really passionate about what we do will find ways to, give ourselves creative projects and just like do something else. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
and I was just going to say, I really have nothing against AI. Obviously, I use it all the time in the cameras that we use, and there's nothing wrong with it at all. But I just really just hope it doesn't become a crutch for so many people. I really don't, and that's kind of how kind of feel like it's where it's going to go. Um, and to me, that's a shame. But because for me, part of the enjoyment of photography is the whole journey, and
Yeah.
doing everything myself and getting the image. And then when you see the final image, you're like, that's mine. Like that was all me. I love that part of photography. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely creatives out there who have the creative vision who can definitely put AI to a massive advantage over some of their competitors out there for sure.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you're saying this as well too because I mean, when the Fujifilm launched the X Pro 3, so many people were really angry about it. And I was one of those guys that was like, oh, this is everything I want. And just last
Right.
night, I went to Times Square and I documented the Biden Harris celebration.
Hmm.
And I didn't sit there like chimping the screen like crazy. I'm just like, all right, I either got the shot or I didn't. But I'm a trained guy, like I'm a former professional, like I can do that. I don't really need to sit there and just like uh chimp the screen all the time. Chimping, for those of you who don't
Hmm.
know what that means, basically it just means like pressing the play button and checking out every image. Um, I don't really need to do that anymore. Just because I mean I have that sort of trust in myself, and I set the camera up totally beforehand to make it easier for me to capture all these moments.
Hmm.
Um, that said, I do think that it's important for us to have sort of higher end cameras where we take away features like that. That's why I really appreciate a lot of Leica M's because they really make you be more creative and be more of an active part of the process.
Hmm.
I
Absolutely.
also really appreciate manual focus lenses for that reason. But I do agree that, we need to find ways to not sit there and just rely on the technology because at a certain point it becomes a question of so who's actually creating this image? Is it you just pushing the button and just telling the camera, hey, I want you to do all of this already? Or is it the camera that's doing all the work for you?
Right. It becomes an ethical issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same can be said about the photography software as well going forward. It's become so automated for a piece of software to change absolutely any aspect of any photo within a couple of seconds. We fall into the same situation again
Yeah.
of it being an ethical issue.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I watched an interesting video on YouTube not too long ago, and it was, is there really any point to photography anymore? Why do I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go out and capture perfect light when someone could just go out in the middle of the day in harsh sunlight, take a picture, and take it back into software and completely change every single lighting element about that image?
And with that, I think that we also have to be more responsible in labeling what our images are once again,
Hmm.
because there's a difference between photo composites and photographs. Like, uh, I subscribe to a number of subreddits, and like,
Hmm.
there's this thing called R pics where like people post photos, but they're actually photo composites, and
Right.
uh, there's been like this whole culture of responsibility that obviously we've been talking about for a while, and a lot of subredditors in there will be like, oh, this is actually a composite. It doesn't actually look that way in real life, and you should really keep that in mind. Um, but that kind of stuff needs to be very clearly labeled, and I think the communities really need to do that. I
Hmm.
don't think Instagram is going to care. I don't think
No.
Adobe is going to necessarily care. Personally, I don't really think Adobe has the best interests of photographers at heart. I've talked about this many times. Um, but yeah, I think it's very important for us to really label the stuff and to call it out. Especially for, the higher end, and talking about, like, this is skill. This is something that
Hmm.
actually took a lot of work by a photographer versus, yeah, I just pushed a button and like the camera did all the rest.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using AI to help you, create what you want to create. But as we're saying, you really do need to be upfront. And I don't know, I don't understand why people want to hide when they've made a composite, because that's a whole other skill set that I know I don't have, that I would love to be able to try. And it takes hours of training to be able to manipulate some of the photos the way people do. So they should just be proud of what they've done with their skills. And there's no problem with differentiating between a composite and a regular image. Just be proud of what you're producing.
I agree with you, but I also think that maybe there's like this sexiness and mystique about being a photographer. Remember seeing this one thing on Comedy Central a while ago where this comedian was just like, "Oh yeah, like I look at musicians and like all the women throw themselves at the musicians, and then I tell ladies, 'Hi, I'm a comedian. Goodbye.'" That's it. And I mean, it's the same thing with being a photographer. Like you can tell someone you're a photographer, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, like either everyone's a photographer or they're actually like enamored by what you do," versus like,
Right.
"Oh yeah, I'm a photo editor," and they're like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no glamour to saying, "Oh yeah, I edit photos for sure."
Yeah.
You picture some dude sitting behind a computer, which we do way too much of, I believe. Which
Yeah.
is why I think, again, learning the skills to be able to get out and just do it yourself in camera is so much more fun than sitting behind a computer.
Yeah, I agree with you. I also think that, people can say I'm a photo artist.
Hmm.
There are some people that have been saying like I'm a multimedia specialist or something like that because they shoot photos, they do videos, they edit photos, they do audio, all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
I just tell people I'm a journalist. I write, uh, but in truth, my job is a lot more than that. I'm also a publisher.
Right.
I edit, I critique, I shoot photos, I do all that kind of stuff. Same with you, you're an editor, but you curate and you test cameras and you write news and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Um, I don't know. I have convoluted and mixed feelings. I also just and think that we should not use technology as a crutch at all. But I also feel like 10 years from now, like people will be like, "Oh, these guys are just being old fogies" or something like that.
I think they think that now.
In some ways, I mean, we're both in our 30s.
Yep. Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
you're
mean,
38, right?
39. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
50 if you ask my kids.
Oh, okay. Nice.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be an interesting road that we're going down in terms of AI, because it's coming whether we like it or not. I mean, we obviously learned in a different time period to the 18-year-old kid who I handed my Pentax to and looked at it like it was, a relic, when it's just a few years old in
Yeah.
reality. So it's really going to be interesting to see how these camera companies leverage AI going forward, and there's definitely room for it. um, and maybe this is going to be a way that camera companies are going to be able to differentiate their products but a little bit more between themselves.
No, I agree with you about that. I also, I've thought about this a little bit. I think that there should be like, there's manual mode, obviously, but I feel like there
Hmm.
should be like pure manual mode where absolutely nothing is automated, where like you have to set the white balance manually and you have to focus manually and you have to
Hmm.
set the aperture and the shutter speed and you're locked into an ISO and you can't change it at all.
That could be kind of
Um,
cool.
yeah, it could be really cool.
Be a great learning tool for sure. I could see lots of colleges, like photography schools, getting cameras like that for people to learn on. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They'd have to be affordable enough and all that
Oh
kind of
yeah,
stuff. But I think it's possible. It's just,
taking all the tech out would, you would think, would drop the price for sure.
yeah. No, I agree with you. I'm hoping so at least.
Hmm.
In the case of Leica, it's not always the case, but
Right.
yeah, and at least in, I would say that in the case of Fujifilm, like, it's not the case, but the X Pro 3, like titanium and like the durable finish and, the two different screens,
Hmm.
you're paying for that. So I'm okay with that. But, um, I really think that it is up to us as creators and our community to really push the fact that, like, no, you have to do all these things yourselves and you really should do them and you shouldn't rely on technology as a crutch. Yeah.
And if you do, you know, that's totally fine, but at least have an understanding of how the things work before you lean onto technology too much. If you have the base understanding, that's fine, and you use the technology to increase or improve your work, that's fantastic. But just don't pick up a camera and just use the camera to do everything for you. That's well, I don't see where the fun in that is personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in that case, then you might as well just stick with your phone.
Exactly. Yep, definitely.
Yeah. Let's see. No one is saying anything in the comments. We would like to hear from you guys.
Oh,
We're
we've got a
curious to
comment.
see. Someone on Facebook says, "Yes, we're old fogies." Um, you whippersnapper. I was called that for the first time a couple of years ago, and I was called a
Whippersnapper.
whippersnapper. I was like, "Wait, what?"
Wow, what happened?
Uh,
How did I get here?
yeah, seriously, man. Oh my god. Oh, we have a comment. You want to read that, Brett?
Sure, this is from Sanjay. Sanjay says, we went through this when autofocus appeared. I used the Olympus OM1s when I'm fed up with technology. Someone just gave me a Pentax K1000 this week. That's a fantastic camera.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry, the technology crutch users will always be with you, but the true pro will always rise above the tech average by using it as a jumping off board. Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. Steve is saying could shoot film. Yes, I agree with you. There are higher end film cameras, DSLR, no, not DSLRs, but film SLRs,
Hmm.
that do have quite a bit of good technology built into them in terms of tracking. Like some of the Nikon stuff, some of the Canon stuff, even some of the old Minolta stuff is pretty good. Um, Olympus used to have like this amazingly crazy metering system with the OM4. I think it was
Hmm.
the T or something like that, but like the metering system was great. Um I agree with you too. I mean, like, actually no, I don't totally agree with you because sometimes, like, one of my favorite cameras is the Fujifilm Natura S. And the
Hmm.
reason why is because it's a point and shoot, does all the work for you. 24 millimeter f1.9 lens, super small. I have never taken a photo with that camera that had the exposure messed up. It's just always perfect.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
every single time. I mean, I have a Mamiya 6 as well too, and that takes work. I have
Hmm.
two Leicas, those take work, and I agree with you about that. But there are easy film cameras. Always keep that in mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but to your point as well too, like, I mean, it does mean you need to sit there and you need to like wait to shoot to see
Hmm.
what your images are going to look like. A lot of people will just sit there and just like machine gun shoot just because they're having so much fun and they can still be in the moment.
You know, that's another thing as well with AI. It's made photography such a run and gun process, and I still like to slow down personally myself and enjoy the process a bit more. But that's just me, you know.
I think it's more than just AI. It's like they suddenly started to put like five stops of image stabilization into
Hmm.
cameras and like negative 5 EV into cameras. And the weirdest thing I see is when people machine gun shoot portraits.
Oh yeah.
Like I've seen it done and I'm like, what are you doing? And they're like,
Why?
oh, I'm bound to get one photo that's like really good. And I'm just like, yeah, but like, what's it takes all the skill out of it.
Not only that, they're having to cull through hundreds of images that are a split second away from each other to pick the perfect one.
Yeah, no,
That's
totally.
that's insane.
You know what? Not enough people star rate in camera either, and that's what I think
Hmm.
is something big. Like, you do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I star rate in camera. I'll go through and I'll be like, okay, cool. 1 star, 1 star, 1 star. No, this is crap. Keep
Hmm.
going. 1 star. And then when I finally bring stuff into post production, I'll just take the starred images and I'll be like, oh, okay, cool. But even so, like, even last night, between two cameras, I shot maybe 600 images in a period of 5 hours.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's not even a lot. And sometimes it was just like, okay, cool, because these guys are moving across like the road and they're moving pretty fast.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, all the images I published, I think I published less than 60. Which I mean, I still had some great ones and all that, but I was just like, no, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. No other comments. Seems like. Let's see on Facebook once again. Someone else calling us an old fogey. No, no one calling us an old fogey. That is good. Uh,
I
I
mean, they're
trimmed it.
not wrong.
Yeah, I know, but I trimmed this beard twice to ensure that I didn't look old today.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. Um, yeah, guys, I think that's it then. In that case, Brett, you have any final thoughts?
No, not really, man. I just really encourage you to really dive down into your camera's manual settings and really just get comfortable with what it can do manually and what you can do and what you can get out of it manually, and then build on it from that, and then use the AI on top of that to create even better images. But just don't rely on AI by itself.
I agree with you on that. And also remember, you have the power. You are the one that creates, not the camera.
Exactly.
Yeah. And with that said, we're going to end the show here. Thank you all for tuning in. If you are in Zoom, we're going to cut the recording. We're going to cut the Facebook live feed in a bit. And we're going to open up the conversation here more candidly. If you are on Facebook, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate, adore, and love you. Same with you guys here on Zoom. We should be back next week, providing no one has any power problems. Maybe Hillary will be able to join us. It'll be pretty cool if she can. And that's really about it, guys. Thank you all so much. We really appreciate you, and take care.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you.